Good afternoon, pilot teachers, and good afternoon, students. Okay, thank you. Sit down. We're going to continue on with our work on looking at faulting. And note that we are working on case studies, and those case studies are supposed to help us understand a little bit more on the topic on diastrophism and the subtopic on faulting. So if we look at the information now on faulting, today we are going to basically look at what we call block faulting. From our last lesson or the previous lesson, we looked at a case study and we concentrated mainly on the Great East African Rift Valley. And today we are going to do more work on faulting, but this time we're going to look at an example of block faulting mainly in Australia. To recap on what we have covered already on faulting and basically rift valleys, I mentioned that there are two ways in which rift valleys can actually be formed. And the first one is through the process of tension, where tensional forces are exerted on a block of land. Faults develop, two faults we're looking at here develop, and then the middle part subsides as a result of the forces of tension. That middle area which has subsided then forms a graben or a rift valley. The second way in which rift valleys can be formed is through the process of compression. The forces of compression are exerted on a block of land, faults develop, and then along those faults, the two blocks on the sides of the middle block overrides, resulting then in a depressed area in the center, and that depressed area then forms the graben or rift valley. Those were the two different ways in which we have looked at on how rift valleys or grabens can be formed. They are formed through the process of tension, and they are also formed by the forces or through the forces of compression. Also, note that I mentioned that recent research has also suggested that there are some rift valleys, for example, the Red Sea Rift and the rift of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge were formed from one fault only and not from two parallel faults. Yet, their structure with a depressed central portion and a high host on either side causes them to be classified as rift valleys. And if you can recall from our previous lesson, we looked at the East African Rift, and the East African Rift extends all the way from the Red Sea down to the river Zambezi. And here we are making reference mainly to the Red Sea Rift, the area in which the Red Sea lies. And it tells us that recent research have suggested that rift valleys can also be created by only one fault line instead of two. And a diagram showing us that example of the Red Sea Rift, whereby you have the Red Sea itself and the rift in which the Red Sea lies, and on either side or on both sides of the Red Sea you have the host of Somalia and the host of Western Arabia. And if you look at the area where the Red Sea lies, there is only one fault line, and along that fault line, the central part which has been depressed is where the Red Sea lies, and the two uplifted areas on both sides are the hosts. Okay, with that information, we moved on now, or we are going to move on now to looking at the next part of our work, and this time I'd like us to look at what we call block faulting. Remember, I mentioned that where we have one fault line, it is easy for us to identify the type of fault which is created. But sometimes, like in the case of the formation of hosts and rift valleys, there are more than one fault line which is present, resulting in some blocks being uplifted and others being depressed along those multiple faults. Where you have a block of land and you have a multiple fault instead of just one fault line, then you have some areas which are going to be uplifted and some areas which are going to be depressed. a term that we can use to describing that whole area then will be block faulting. Okay, in block faulting, we can end up with features such as hosts, tilt blocks, and grabens or rift valleys being created. So with the information from the monitor now, it tells us that earth movements sometimes cause the crust to be divided into rectangular shaped blocks, some of which are uplifted and others are depressed. You can also make reference to the handout or the worksheet that I have distributed. This process is called block faulting. Uplifted blocks may either be tilted when they form tilt block, or they may be horizontal to form hosts. The tilt block usually would have one pronounced scap. And an example of a tilt block is the Western Ghats of the Deccan, while hosts have two pronounced scaps. Some examples of hosts and tilt blocks we will do later on, and I will give you some examples of hosts and tilt blocks to go and actually research for your homework and to plot accurately on blank world maps to show the location of such features. Okay, and from this information, you note that tilt blocks, they usually have one pronounced scap. Meanwhile, hosts would have two pronounced scaps. We move on. The diagram that you can see from the monitor or from your handout there shows us a classic example of what block faulting is about. Here you have more than one fault line, and along those different faults you have some areas being uplifted and other areas being depressed. And from the diagram you can see the uplifted areas being referred to as the hosts, and there's two here from the example given, and the depressed area here could be a graben or a rift valley. But the point to remember is that there are more than one fault line for block faulting to occur. From this particular example, you can see 1, 2, 3 fault lines here. Then we can look at other examples. Block faulting does not have to only involve 2 or 3 fault lines. You might have an area whereby there are more than 2 or 3 fault lines. Let's look at an example here of the Great Basin. And the Great Basin is actually found in United States or USA. And when we make reference to the Great Basin, according to this particular cross-section, it is only this area here, starting from this point to that point. And if you look at this cross-section in America, we are looking at only this area here to give us an example of block faulting. You can see multiple faults, and you can see within this area, which is known as the Great Basin, there are a couple of sections which have been uplifted and then the others depressed and etc. This particular cross-section, if we look at the map of America, note it will only be from the Pacific Ocean to where the Rockies is. Okay, it does not go right across to the Atlantic Ocean or to the eastern side. It only stretches from around here to that point. So only within this region. So if we look at our maybe atlas and we can look at a scale, generally we are looking at approximately 1,600 kilometers of area here that we are making reference to. From the Pacific Ocean, if we are going across to around where the Rockies are. This diagram is actually showing that. From the Pacific Ocean in the west, we come to the Californian Valley, the Sierra Nevada mountains, and then you come to the area which is known as the Great Basin. And it is this area here where block faulting is actually evident. And if you continue on, you come to the Wasatch Mountains, the Colorado Plateau, and then the Rockies. And if you continue on, then you would come to the other side of America, the eastern side now, and that's where the Atlantic Ocean is. But we are looking at only about 1,600 approximately to 1,800 kilometers for that particular cross-section. Okay, we pay attention to the example of block faulting here where the Great Basin is. Okay, if we had to take that diagram out and enlarge it, this is the example of the Great Basin that we are making reference to. It's only this area here, from this point to that point, of which now it has been enlarged. So if you look at that area, you can see a couple of fault lines, multiple faults. And within that region also, you can note there are some blocks which have been uplifted, the others which have been depressed. And this is a good example, again, of what we mean by block faulting. Anyone with any queries or questions with what we have done so far? Yes, Val has a question.
Do these faults occur at the same time or different stages?
Okay, sometimes you might find that when plates are moving away from each other or when plates are moving towards each other, the process of convergence and divergence. And even during the time when plates are sliding past each other, where we have the passive boundaries, fault lines are likely to be created. And fault lines are simply weaknesses on the Earth's crust. Sometimes you might have all of those faults occurring at the same time, and it's possible. At other times, it depends on where the crust is actually weakest. Then you have the faults being created first, and then later the other fault lines being created. So it does not have to be all of those faults occurring at the same time. It depends on the weakness of the crust, and with plate movements or tectonic movements, those fault lines can be created. We can have all of them occurring at the same time, or we can have some of them occurring first and then later the others. Because tectonic movements is always continuous. Plates are always diverging, they're always converging, and they're always sliding past each other. Okay, Val? Okay, so here we're looking at an example of block faulting in the United States. Now we'll go on to doing some activities, and our activities will see us look at block faulting in Australia. Okay, from the handout you have the information there, otherwise you can make reference to the information from the monitor first, and then I'll give you time for the completion of the activities. The activity that you're going to work on will be, you will have a cross-section of a particular area in Australia. It is in South Australia we are making reference to here because that's what we are going to work on for our activity. And you're going to use your atlases as well as the handout or the worksheet that is given for the completion of exercise 13. Okay, we make reference now to this particular region in Australia. We're looking at Melbourne, the Port Phillip Bay. You have your atlas. You can open your atlases to the page where it contains information on Australia. Page 40 and 41. Okay, page 40 and 41 is a section for our activities. You find a map that contains Melbourne so that you can make reference to Port Phillip Bay. Okay, and page 36 of your atlas will contain the area known as Port Phillip Bay. Can you see that from page 36 and 37? Okay, this particular area in Australia is actually in what we call a sunk land. So Port Phillip Bay in Australia, found mainly in Melbourne, this area here we're making reference to here, is actually in a sunk land. So we have Melbourne here, Port Phillip Bay is this area here. From your atlas, you are able to pick that up. This particular region in Australia is similar to a rift valley that's talking about Port Phillip Bay. But movements took place along several faults and monocline in that region. The major ones are actually shown on the map of the Port Phillip Bay area. So you can go now to your booklet and the booklet, you have a diagram there showing the fault lines in that region of which movements have actually taken place. You can make reference to the information from the monitor. You see this particular region here, we are concentrating mainly on Port Phillip Bay here. And note that there are 4 main features which are mentioned here, which are also responsible for the movement along this region. The Roseleaf Fault is labeled with number 1. The Lovely Banks monocline is labeled with number 2, the feature here with a red line across. Then we have the Selwyn's Fault, of which that is represented with the number 3, and the Beaumaris monocline, which is actually labeled with the number 4. So within this area here, there are a couple of faults, and within this area also there has been some areas which have been uplifted and others which have been depressed. And the region where Port Phillip Bay is located is supposed to be a sunk land, an example of a rift valley. We continue. The movements which have taken place along that area have taken place within the last 3 million years, and Selwyn's Fault, which is number 3 according to our diagram here, it says that that particular fault, the Selwyn's Fault, is still active. The sea has actually invaded the part of the sunken land to form what we call Port Phillip Bay today. So if we go to that particular diagram, that information basically shows us what has happened within this region here in Melbourne. Note that when land is actually raised between 2 faults, the raised block is called a host. Another region in Australia of which we are going to do our activities on now is going to be the Gulf region of South Australia. So now you go to the work or your map on page 40 and 41. And we are going to look at the Gulf region of South Australia. That particular area is here. Note this region here. Port Phillip Bay here. Our activities will see us look at this region here in Australia. It tells us there that the Gulf region of South Australia has been formed by movement along faults. Some of the blocks, such as the Yoke Peninsula and the Mount Lofty ranges, have risen to form hosts. The sea has flooded 2 of the down-faulted sections to form the Spencer Gulf and the St. Vincent Gulf. So if we look at the map 2 up here, and from your atlases, you can find the Spencer Gulf and the St. Vincent Gulf. Look at the cross-sectional view of that particular region, especially make reference to point A to point B. If we had to draw a cross-section in that particular region, this one here, note the Yoke Peninsula, Spencer Gulf, the St. Vincent Rift. Along that line A to B, this is what block faulting would actually represent for this particular region from point A to point B. Okay, so if you look at that information, you can see now some areas which have been uplifted. There is a depressed area, uplifted area, depressed area, and etc. along that line from A to B. So here we have another good example of block faulting. What I'd like you to work on now is looking at that region. I'd like you to complete exercise 17, sorry, not 13, exercise 17 from your handout. And all you have to do is write in the correct word that should go in those spaces that are provided. But you have to select from the diagrams to help you complete the activity. Okay, looking at, before you start, this is another example now of that particular region again, the Gulf of South Australia, the Gulf region in South Australia, and you look at some of those uplifted areas and the depressed areas along multiple faults. You have a photograph showing that region, some of the uplifted areas from that particular region as shown there on the photograph or picture. Okay, your task, exercise 17, fill in the appropriate words that would go in those blank spaces. There are 7 spaces. I will give you at least 7 minutes for the completion of those activities. Okay, we'll correct those, the activity together now. We'll start from Silo, and from that row we are going to go across for our answers. Okay, the rest of us will be making corrections. Looking at that region, you have the map of Australia to help you so that you have a fair idea on which area we're making reference to here. On the map of Australia frontier, it is this region we are looking at. And from our atlas, it tells us we're looking at South Australia. Okay, the Gulf region of South Australia has been formed by movements along, what word should go there, Silo?
Faults.
Faults is correct. Okay, we check. Make your corrections. The next one, the sea has invaded to, what word should go then?
Down-faulted sections.
Okay, if you had down-faulted section, you can give yourself a tick. Any other possibility instead of down-faulted section? Down-faulted section is correct. What could be other possible words that we can also put in the blank space number 2? Rift is correct, or rift valleys is correct, or graben, yes. Grabens is also correct. So any 3 of the words in that space should be correct. Down-faulted areas or sections, rift valleys, or grabens, which now form what should go in number 3?
Spencer Gulf.
Okay, Spencer Gulf is correct. And number 4?
St. Vincent Gulf.
Okay, St. Vincent Gulf. Okay, listen, if you decided to put St. Vincent's Gulf in number 3 and Spencer Gulf in 4, it will still be correct. Okay, so we have number 3 and number 4, the 2 Gulf, and it is supposed to be the Spencer Gulf and St. Vincent Gulf. Okay, we move on. Adelaide is situated on the blank.
Southeast.
Southeast is correct, or if you had east, you can also give yourself a tick. Okay, we have, going back, to number 2, we have grabens or rift valleys or down-faulted area. Number 3, Spencer Gulf. And number 4, St. Vincent Gulf. We just said that Adelaide is situated on the southeast, or if you have the eastern shore, that is still correct. Okay, you have the eastern shore or the southeastern shore of St. Vincent Gulf. Noel, the uplifted blocks are called?
Host.
Noel?
Host.
Host is correct. Okay, check. And finally, Frank, Yoke Peninsula is an example of a, what should go in number 7?
Host.
Okay, that's correct. So the Yoke Peninsula you note that is an example of a host because it is an uplifted area along that cross section. So you check and you make correction to exercise 17 from your handout or worksheet. Okay, I'm going to give you now your homework. And for your homework, you will need a blank map of the world. And from that blank map of the world, you are required to plot the following features of hosts and tilt blocks on that blank world map. Note, you will be required to use appropriate key so that you can work out which is which and on where those different features are located. The two lots of features that I would like you to work on are tilt blocks and hosts. And the tilt blocks, you will find those on the handout which I have given you. And I would like you to find out and plot accurately on your blank world map where the Deccan Plateau is. That is an example of a tilt block. The Arabian Plateau and the Brazilian Plateau. For the hosts, the Korean host, the Sinai host, and the Black Forest hosts. Those are the three examples of hosts that I'd like you to plot accurately on the blank world map where they are found or located. And similarly for the tilt block, the three that are given to plot on the blank world map. And that is what I'd like you to complete for your homework. I will distribute the blank world map through your class captain and you can pick them up. Use atlases or maps to help you for the completion of that activity. That also brings us to the end of our lesson. Class, if you could now stand up. To the pilot teachers, our keyword for lesson 51 is tilt blocks. Good afternoon and thank you, students.